Today, we talk about tissues. So, as we understand, a human being is made of trillions of cells. And the way we define cell is the basic structural unit of livings. So, if a group of cells with the same function or similar structures combine together, that is called tissue. So a tissue is nothing more than a group of cells. So that's 40 trillion of cells in our body are finally combined together and categorized into 4 groups. They are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So I want you to remember, although trillions of cells in our body, those trillions make only 4 types of tissue, and these are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Look at the basic structure of cell. I'm not going to go into details about a cell and the cellular structures, but I believe you remember a cell is covered with the cell membrane or plasma membrane. Inside the plasma membrane, we have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is filled with cytosol, nucleus, nucleolus, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and so on. So this is a very short reminder about the cell and cell's content. And this is the function of the plasma membrane, and this is how the plasma membrane is made of. It is made of phospholipid bilayer and embedded protein, and some proteins are attached to it with some cholesterol. And these proteins, which are embedded in the phospholipid bilayer, they are called integral protein, and those just attached to the surface membrane will be called peripheral proteins. And cytoplasm is the space inside the plasma membrane, and cytosol is the substance in that space. Contents of the cytoplasm, I believe you remember your biology lecture, and we just move on swiftly. A human being, like a human being is a living which is made of body and soul, and human being can be classified according to their age, sex, skin color, and so on. But whatever it is, a human being is made of only 4 types of cell. They are epithelial, connective tissue, muscle, and nervous tissue. So I want you to grab it. So as we understand, histology is the microscopic study of structure of tissue. So whenever you have a slide, glass slide for the histology specimen, I want you to think about only those 4 types of tissue. So could be anything, but it is nothing more than those 4 types of tissue. It could be nervous tissue, it could be muscle tissue, it could be connective tissue, or it could be epithelial tissue. Nothing more than that, because we are giving you a histology slide. Let's look at this diagram. It is an intestine of a small animal. This is a very low power, and we have a bad eyesight of view. And now if we zoom into this particular area, we will see something like that. What we can see is there are multiple cells, which is represented by the nucleus with dark purple colored nuclei. And on one side, there are facing the empty space, which is the intestinal lumen. And on the other side, they are resting on another type of tissue, which is not the same like the tissues here. So multiple cells with polarity. Polarity means like facing on one side, it's an empty space. On the opposite side, sitting on another type of tissue. It is just like, looking at the San Francisco Bay Area from the air, you can see empty space on one side, which is the Pacific, and you can see the inland here. And let's look at that again, like this is the intestinal lumen, and these are the cells. These cells are resting on another type of tissue. Let's keep looking around, going to the right, going to the left, and you will appreciate the lumen here, and the cells are projecting into the lumen, but on the opposite side, they are still sitting on another type of tissue. Now we can see, really zoom in with the high power microscope lens, and now we can easily see the shape of the cell. These cells are tall, and you can see the nucleus here and there, and the empty spaces stay here. Now I'm going to show you a diagram. The cells here, one cell, another cell, another cell, they are resting on the connective tissue. On the opposite side, they do not have anything else. In between the cells, there are specialized junctions connecting to each other. Look at that. You can see one type of junction here, another type of junction here, and another type of connection here in between the cells. And if you look at carefully, these connections are called either tight junction or gap junction or desmosomes. Desmosomes are something sticking two cells together. Tight junctions will block the passing of molecules from one cell to another, and the gap junctions will let the molecules to go and share in between nearby cells. So now I hope you can appreciate this diagram. One empty space, clear space, opposite side resting on the another type of tissue, multicellular, hypercellularity. So that is the characteristics of epithelial tissue. So we are talking about the very first type of tissue from the 4 types of tissue, which is epithelia. The characteristics are cellularity. They are resting on the supporting connective tissue. Polarity, as we see, one side is facing on the empty space and the other side is resting on the connective tissue. We saw the specialized connection. And if you look at in this diagram, this yellow colored structure, which is a nerve ending, that goes into the cell. But look at the red colored structure, which is the blood vessel, the smallest blood vessel, capillaries. They do not go into the cell, which means the epithelial cells are supplied with the nerve, but they do not have direct blood supply. So they are avascular. A means no vascular, no blood vessel. They get their nutrition by diffusion from these capillaries, but the capillaries doesn't go into the cell. So I want you to remember the characteristics of epithelial tissue: cellularity, polarity, supporting connective tissue, specialized contact between each other. There is no blood vessel. They get nutrition from the diffusion. They are innervated by the nerves and they do regenerate. So they do die and they do form. It's the cell turnover is always there. And their jobs could be protection, secretion, absorption, diffusion, filtration, and secretion. Of course, depend on the shape, and we'll look into that. So how do we classify epithelial tissue? The easiest way is to start with the shape of the cells which make the tissue. If the cells are flat, it is just like a scale. It is called squamous epithelial cell. And altogether, they will become squamous epithelial tissue. Let's say if they are like a square shape, cuboidal shape, then they will be called cuboidal tissue. Cuboidal cells, which will make cuboidal epithelial tissue. If the cells become tall, like a column, then they will be called columnar cell, and combination of these columnar cells will be called columnar epithelial tissue. So that's according to their shape. The cells can be classified into three main things. And let's say if we use only one single layer of squamous, then we will say simple squamous epithelial tissue, because we are using the only one layer, simple, and this epithelial tissue is flat squamous, simple squamous epithelial tissue. But let's say if we put multiple layers of squamous cell together, we will call multiple layer squamous, or in other words, they will be called stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Pseudo-stratified, pseudo mean it is not real, it is fake. I mean, it looks like multiple layer, but it is not multiple layer, and transitional, the cell shape will gradually change. That is the transitional tissue. Okay, I hope you can appreciate the flat squamous cell now, which is like a scale, and therefore we will call squamous epithelial cell. Combination of squamous epithelial cells will become squamous epithelial tissue. Cuboid shape, cuboidal cell, and long, tall column, columnar cell or columnar epithelial tissue. So now if you look at this diagram, the tissue is made of flat and only one layer. Therefore, this is the simple squamous epithelium. Where can you find these? Or what do they do? How useful are they? Because it is such a one layer of thin and flimsy cells, so they will not be for protection, but they will be useful for diffusion and filtration. So we will use them in the lungs, for example, like at the end of the lungs, we have alveoli. That is for gas exchange, so that's for diffusion. It will be good to use this one thin layer of flat sheet of cells for diffusion in the lungs. In the kidneys as well, like in the kidney glomeruli, for the filtration of blood in the process of formation of urine, we will use it. So one flat squamous cell is useful for diffusion and filtration. Now cells become higher and become cuboidal shape. Cuboidal, because the cell size become bigger, they have more space to perform function. And therefore, these cells will be performing some secretion and absorption functions. These cuboidal cells are highly used in renal tubules, because inside the renal tubules, there will be sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarb exchange, water reabsorption, and filtration. So not filtration, sorry, and water reabsorption and secretion into the renal tubules, and therefore they will be useful in that area. Now, if you look at the histology slide, the cells are really long and tall, like a column, and therefore they are called columnar epithelium. It is one layer, and therefore it is called simple columnar epithelium. Now, if you look at this columnar epithelium, columnar cell, they are really tall. They have large space inside the cell, and they are functioning far more like they will do absorption, they will do secretion of mucus, enzyme. So they will be useful for the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, our stomach, our small intestine, large intestine. And on similar structure, the cells are long and tall. They look like multiple layer, but they are not really a multiple layer. And therefore, let's try to say this is pseudo-stratified, meaning it is imitating multiple layer columnar epithelium. But if you look at the border, they do have little cilia, which is like a brush. So these little cilia will entrap the impurities of air we breathe in. So this sort of cells will be useful in our respiratory tract. When we take a deep breath in, then if there is any impurities, small particles, dust, they will be entrapped by these cilia, and finally they will push those unwanted particles up along the respiratory tract. And therefore, pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelia, they will be used for the respiratory tract, especially in trachea. Keep looking at the histology slide. Now you can see the multiple cells, lots and lots of cells. They are resting on another type of cell, which is very different from them. On opposite side, it is an empty space, polarity, cellularity, and therefore we will call it, it is the epithelial tissue. And the cells are flat if we look carefully, and therefore, and it is multiple layer, therefore we will say stratified squamous epithelium. Now we have another coating layer, which is called keratin. So in this histology slide, we can see the keratin. In this histology slide, we cannot see the keratin. And therefore, they are called keratinized because it is coated with keratin. And here, there is no keratin, therefore non-keratinized. So we will see this type of tissue in our skin, keratinized. So this is a good table to summarize what we have talked about. And now it comes to the glands. Glands is similar to tissue. It's a group of epithelial cells combined together. And if these cells produce aqueous fluid, that usually proteins, then that is called glands. In our body, we have two main types of gland, exocrine gland and endocrine gland. Endocrine glands, they do not have ducts. They secrete hormone, and they secrete hormone directly into the blood vessel. Therefore, they are called ductless gland. There is no duct. For example, like thyroid gland. Thyroid gland, we produce thyroid hormone, and that thyroid hormone will be directly transferred into the bloodstream. There is no duct. On the opposite, exocrine gland, they do have ducts, and they do secrete their secretion into the desired area with the duct. And this is the knowledge, the goblet cell, it is the unicellular exocrine gland. So now this is a diagram which is summarizing the different types of epithelial tissue. Now I have shown you another histology slide here. And I want you to compare this slide with this. Here, as we know, we can see multiple cell and cellularity and polarity. But here, it is a different story, isn't it? This is an empty C. This is an empty C with some cell here and there and there. So that is very different from this epithelial tissue. And this is the histology slide of connective tissue. So now we talk about connective tissue. And even in the connective tissue, there are 4 subtypes. Number 1, connective tissue proper. Number 2, skeletal tissue, which is bone. Number 3, cartilage. And number 4, blood. So don't forget, blood is a type of connective tissue. Let's look at that. The matrix, which is like an empty C, filled with little fibers running. And inside the matrix, there are cells here and there and here and there. You can easily count. There are not many cells in this histology slide. So that is the very characteristic feature of the connective tissue. So let's try to zoom in to this slide. So now if you zoom in, you can see this sort of diagram. You can see the cell and you can see the matrix. Matrix is made of fibers, as you saw from the previous histology slide. These fibers could be collagen fiber, elastic fiber, or reticular fibers. And in between the fibers, the matrix is filled with ground substance. There will be some capillaries running in the connective tissue. When it comes to the cells, the most important cell which makes that particular connective tissue is the either fibroblast or osteoblast or chondroblast. If we put fibroblast in this matrix, we will get fibrous tissue. If we put chondroblast, chondro means cartilage, blast means cell, chondroblast, we will get cartilage tissue. And if we put osteoblast, O-S-T-E-O, osteoblast in this matrix, we will get bone tissue because osteoblast will form bone. Of course, there are a few other cells like lymphocyte, mast cell, fat cell, neutrophils. But whatever it is, what I want to say is a cartilage is made of cell and matrix. The cell could be here, and the matrix is made of fibers, ground substance. So this summarizes what I have talked about. Connective tissue, components, cell, matrix, and ground substance. And as we saw from the previous slides, there are a small number of cells, not as many cells as we saw in the epithelial tissue, large amount of matrix. There will be ground substance, and they are originated from the mesenchymal tissue. Right. So cells could be either fibroblast, chondroblast, or osteoblast. Cells will be fat, white cell, white blood cell, macrophage, and mast cell. Let's say if we use fibrous cell, which is fibroblast, fibro means fibrous, blast means cell, we get the fibrous tissue. If we use chondroblast, Chondro means cartilage, blast means cell, chondroblast, cartilage forming tissue, and osteoblast, osteo means bone, blast means cell, bone forming cell, we get bone. And if we look at the fibers, as we saw, collagen fiber, elastin fibers, and reticular fibers. The ground substance is nothing more than proteoglycan and glycosaminoglycan. The function of these is to maintain water. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about collagen, elastin, and reticular fibers. They are nothing more than amino acid chains. So keep it simple. A collagen chain is the combination of 3 amino acids. Elastin, amino acid chain. Reticular fiber is made of collagen, so which means amino acid chain. So these are the comparison of different types, different classes of connective tissue. As we saw, the different types of connective tissues are connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. The connective tissue proper can be subdivided into loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. So I want you to have a look at this diagram and try to memorize a few little things. And in cartilage, there are 3 types of cartilage, which is hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrous cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the cartilage which covers the bone surface inside the joint. Elastic cartilage, the best example is our ear, which is made of elastic cartilage. And fibrocartilage is where 2 bones are joined and rigidly fixed and stacked together like with a glue. That is the fibrocartilage, so which we can see in the symphysis pubis. Bones can be compact bone or spongy bone. So now this table compare the epithelial tissue and different types of connective tissue. And here, if you want to go a little bit deeper, connective tissue proper can be loose connective tissue or dense connective tissue. Loose connective tissue, areolar connective tissue, adipose tissue, our fat cells. So I want you to have a little photographic memory about this adipose tissue. And if you look at that, you can see the globules of fat. And that is very typical of adipose tissue. If you look at that reticular tissue and elastic tissue histology slide, they look very similar. And therefore, we are not going to ask you to differentiate between elastic connective tissue and reticular connective tissue. But we might ask you to say, hey, what is this? This is the histology slide of connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue, if you look at that, there will be fibers, which are the elastic fibers. There will be ground substance inside the fibers, and you can see the cells, fibroblast. And this is a type of connective tissue, which is the areolar connective tissue. The function is it gives a cushion. It wraps around the organ. That is their function. And as you saw from the epithelial tissue slices, and this support the epithelial tissue, epithelium. And look at that photomicrograph, adipose tissue. You can see the fat globules here and there. Nucleus here. Look at that. This is just a drawing. This is a much better photograph. And the function is to reserve food fuel and insulation. Now, this is the reticular connective tissue. As I say, I'm not going to ask you to differentiate between different types of connective tissue with this diagram, but at least I want you to appreciate this is a type of connective tissue because it doesn't look like epithelial tissue, that's for sure. And this is from the spleen. So number 3 type of tissue is mast cell tissue. Mast cell, like the mast cell bulk we see with our naked eye, it is a composite tissue. Composite tissue means it is made of mast cell tissue plus connective tissue. Connective tissue gets involved in many different other types of tissue because their function is to support and cushion and wrap all together. Therefore, mast cell is not clean of connective tissue. There are 3 types of mast cell tissue. They are striated or skeletal mast cell, smooth mast cell, and cardiac mast cell tissue. So let's go and look at the skeletal mast cell tissue. If you look at this histology slide, you can see the striations here running. You can see the cells running parallel here. They look large, they are running parallel, and they look cylindrical. They have multiple nuclei. So these are the characteristics of skeletal mast cell tissue. They are long, they are cylindrical, they have multiple nucleations and striations. So it is for the voluntary movement of the locomotion, and it moves the bones and joint, like the muscles, like bicep muscle, tricep muscle in our body. The muscles which move the bones and joint voluntarily. Let's look at this muscle. It is very difficult, like a little spindle-shaped cells, multiple layers, spindle shape. There is no striations. You might say, hey, could it be a cartilage tissue? Because you can see the matrix fibers running with the cells. I won't blame you for that. But if you look carefully, the cells are spindle-shaped, multiple, and this is a form of smooth mast cell tissue. Smooth mast cell tissues are involuntary, and they are present in the walls, lumens of the gastrointestinal tract. So now look at this histology slide. You might want to say, hey, there are some striations here. The fibers are running like skeletal, but they do branch here. Hey, look at that, they are branching and they are joining. So they do branch and join. This is the characteristic features of cardiac mast cell tissue. So cardiac mast cell tissue, you might see some striations, but they do branch, they do join. And generally they are uninucleated, only one nucleus. So this cardiac mast cell tissue is used only in the heart. So now you have seen 3 different types of mast cell tissue, which are skeletal mast cell, smooth mast cell, and cardiac mast cell. Now let's go to the last type of tissue, which is the nervous tissue. Whenever we talk about nervous tissue, this is a structure you are going to see, which is a neuron. A neuron is the structural unit and functional unit of nervous tissue. So let's say if I give you a piece of brain, and if I ask you, what is it made of? Of course, a piece of brain will be made of neurons. Neurons plus the surrounding supporting cells which support the neuron, which are called neuroglial cells. There will be some blood vessels inside the brain. So a piece of brain tissue is made of neuron, which is this, and those cells supporting the neuron, which are called neuroglia cells. And that's nothing more than that. So let's study a few features of neuron. If you look at that, this is called cell body. It is like a jellyfish neuron. It looks like a jellyfish with the spikes coming out from the cell body. These spikes are called dendrites. Dendrites will catch information around the neuron and bring those information into the cell body. In the cell body, the nucleus is in the center. And finally, the cell body taper on the opposite side and gradually become a long, prolonged tail, which is called axon. And this axon will end at some point like a terminal boutons. So this is a characteristic of a typical neuron. So I want you to remember this diagram, which is like a jellyfish. That is a neuron. Neuron has cell body, dendrites, axon, and neuroglia cells, which will support the neurons. Neurons are found in the brain, spinal cords, and nerve. Neuroglia cells, their job is to support the neuron, protect the neuron. They do not have nervous function. They are just supporting cells, and they will maintain the homeostasis of the neural environment. Now we are getting close to the end of our lecture. And we said a cell is the basic structural unit of living. A human being is a multicellular organism. A group of cells with the same function will form tissue, and there are 4 types of tissues. I'm going to introduce you a term called functional units. Functional unit is the functioning units, functioning cells of that particular organ or system. Like in the skeletal muscle, a sarcomere, which you will see, a sarcomere is the functional unit. In the nervous system, neuron, which we saw. In the bone, osteon is the functional unit, and in the kidney, a nephron is the functional unit. And therefore, when the nephrons are destroyed, the kidney doesn't do its functions anymore, because nephrons are the working horse for the kidney. A human being is made of multiple systems. Systems are made of organs. Organs are made from tissue. Tissues are made from cells, and cells are made from the chemical structure: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and so on. Okay, guys, so that's the end of the lecture. But before I let you go, can I show you some slides? This is the epithelial tissue, because polarity and cellularity and multiple cell. Again, this is the ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. This is epithelial tissue because multiple cells, empty space resting on another type of tissue, polarity, and multiple layers, flat cell, that will be stratified squamous epithelium. Now we look at that. Again, this must be epithelial tissue because on one side it is sitting on another type of tissue. On the opposite side, it is empty space. The cells are multiple here and there, but the cells shape change from here to there. If you can look at that, the cell shape change multiple here. That is the typical of transitional epithelium. Now, if you look at that, that is a cross-section of the nephrons. You can see the cuboidal cell, which is cubit shape with the lumen inside. This is the cuboidal dish. Thank you.